at least I can
have interest in disposing data. I'll hand over to Witold.
So, hi, I'm Witold. I'm with the German Aerospace Center, DLR, and I'm also very much interested in the policy side of controlled deletion of data.
I'll go and jump in. I'm Claire Wright. I'm a product manager for data services at NESI, the New Zealand eScience infrastructure, so based in New Zealand. We so far are more probably about retention, but are kind of looking to be about deletion, and sort of bring a bit more of a national view to this conversation. Lisanne?
Hello. Hi. Karen, so I'm Lisanne Kadir. I'm a senior solutions architect here at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And Amanda, my colleague, is going to tell you more about what we do. But more specifically, my role is to look at what we're designing the digital research infrastructure that extramural researchers around our country are going to need to be successful with all their research projects. So everything from astronomy all the way to engineering and environmentalists, et cetera, including the HATS group, Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. So what we're looking to do is to optimize the systems that we're provisioning. And so what we'd like to see is to develop a bit of a persona where we can see if there are triggers for certain groups that can move content to the next stage of their life cycle. And that includes disposing to an open access repository or disposing to a hard drive, and everything in between, or delete. So yeah, we're interested in retention and disposition scheduling from a variety of different areas. So over to Amanda.
Hi, Erin. I'm Amanda Tomei, and I work with Lisanne over at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and I'm their preservation coordinator for the Federated Research Data Repository, or FERDR, to simplify the name. And really, I work with preservation, long-term preservation, data normalization of file formats, as well as work with data retention. How long do we need to keep data in our repository once it's deposited?
Max, do you want to go, and then Aaron?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not officially part of this group, but I know both Claire and Luke from previous work that I've been involved with. I work for the ARDC, the Australian Research Data Commons. We're a national outfit that looks at investing into this sector for greatest benefit for the research sector. My particular speciality in this comes with the operational concerns of data storage and retention. And as such, I'm interested in identifying areas that can benefit from strategic investment in this space to attend to some of the changes that are required to get the benefits that you folks see. So I sometimes loiter, I sometimes participate.
Thanks, Max. Welcome, Aaron.
Hi, I'm Aaron Kaplan. I'm a software developer. I maintain the IRI data library at Columbia University. IRI is the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And we store a lot of climate data, historical weather observations and forecasts, and reanalyses, and also societal data, information about things like disease spread, various public health issues, and agriculture, crop yields, things like that. And our clients do, the clients of this data library do a lot of projects relating human endeavors to climate variability and climate change. And like I think Claire said, we've had a policy in the past of retaining everything forever, and it's sort of starting to dawn on people that might not always be possible. And we're trying to figure out a retention policy, a sane retention policy.
Cheers. You're definitely amongst friends in that regards. We pasted a link to the shared doc that we've been working on. The objective of this group as a birds of a feather session is to see if there's enough interest in forming a working group, or at least an interest group, but hopefully a working group with a clear product where we might be able to put that forward for an activity over the next 18 months. We had a fairly large turnout for the first session that we ran this in the friendly to Eurozone time session. And with about 40 attendees, we ran out of time towards the end, but there was a fair bit of interest in the policy side, as you'll see if you scroll down through that document, and potentially in some other artifacts that that there might be valuable activities to shape around. But we'd certainly want to extend an invitation to you to join in this work if it's interesting to you. So the activities that we did during the BoF, when we had the larger group, ran us through a series of warm-up activities to get us all willing to talk as a large group and to start saying where's your problem space and what types of activities would be of interest to you, without obviously putting you too much on the spot with all the blaring headlights of our smiles in your face, but that kind of intent around the policy space or other activities, is any of that striking a chord with you?
Yes, I just started looking through the document now, but I think we would be interested in participating.
I'll give you some time to parse that, but if there's anything that jumps out at you, feel free to ask us in voice chat. I was surprised how much immediate jump in there was, given how little time we had at the end, but how many people typed in the willingness to think around the policy space. That was a natural grab in the work that we did in Australia a few years ago, that everybody wanted at least some clarity around the policy space. Did the rest of you have a chance to have a quick read through the document and see some of the notes from those last two sprints? Anything jump out at any of you that surprised you or interested you as something worth following up?
I'm seeing that there's a lot of expectation, shall we say, or hope that the DMP will inform some of these policy-based moves, etc., or that there's a deep relationship, and we agree that there should be some ways of gleaning some data management, data to move across the life cycle based on some of the DMP information that is provided. So that was good. I do see that a lot coming up as a theme. Valuation is the other one. Data valuation kind of go hand in hand with the retention thing. So just my observations.
Yeah, I think this kind of reflects the general tendency to see those as two sides of a medal, that you have retention and deletion, and the question whether one is necessarily the full complement of the other. But it has a very high overlap, and this is also what was in the notes visible. But there was also a very interesting addition from Graham, who wanted to get away from this binary vision of keeping or throwing away. And he opened a whole can of worms, in my understanding here, because this really digs really deep into the scientific domain, deciding how to thin out.
One of the observations that we had during our working groups last year, and correct me if I'm right or wrong, Claire, Max, because your brains were also in that room, but there was an observation that the researchers get to decide what is and isn't data, and so their process naturally is determining thinning through that practice anyway. And so there will be some data, raw data, that's thrown away often by the methodology that they're choosing, or especially observation runs that they might choose to include or not include according to methodology. But that practice, in fact, across systems does end up with junk that units and teams and certainly HPC centers throw away all the time. So is that ring true in your observations and what you see? So if that's what he means by thinning as a coherent practice, I'm fairly happy with it.
That was my understanding too, Luke. I like to think of it as we spend an awful lot of time trying to convince researchers that their data are valuable. They know that their data are valuable. They just don't see how that value impacts them beyond their traditional cycle. So that's what it used to be. It may have moved on somewhat a little bit now. And of course, it's going to be different depending on the data type. Observational data is extremely valuable, reproducible data less so. And one of the things that I've often thought is missing in this space is a gate. How do we define this gate on encouraging people to keep stuff that they consider to be important, which traditionally would be good practice, instead of the myth that you can keep everything forever. And there has to be this middle ground, and that's what I'm thinking about as the thinning. Now, the degree to that happens is variable, but it doesn't exist right at the moment, not that I'm aware of anyway, not that I've seen. We've not seen any gates. So whereas the publishing industry would be considered a gate for scholarly communication, we don't see such a gate for data management. And I think it might be wise for us to consider how that might, what that would look like from an operational perspective. So I see that as thinning.
I like your concept here, Max, and I guess my question is, could we not see sort of public, domain repositories as being the current gates that we have for data?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different ways of doing this. There's a very big drive for domain repositories because they preserve the semantic context under which the data was collected, and that's the richest source of context as far as I've ever seen. But that there's an operational consequence to that. Who's going to do it? And how's it going to be paid for? Nothing's free in this world. We all know this. And some countries are blessed with foresight from their agencies, some less so. And longevity is a real sticker here for domain repositories. I remember when I was at Cancer Research UK, there was an uproar because these very valuable databases that were being managed for a long time by an organization in, I think it was in Europe somewhere, just closed and disappeared. And the data may still be around somewhere, but it's certainly not as available as it used to be. And they were community-driven activities.
Yeah, so Max, I think you brought here a very, very important player, and this is the gatekeeper who at the same time is also making the funding or the financial decisions, because this is creeping up, and this is also something I see now in several centers and also research alliances in the German area, or in the German-speaking area, where this doesn't really come from the scientists, but more from the bean counters or the operational IT part, where they say, okay, we can't pay for this, so there will have to be decisions. And usually those are very happy if they have some suggestions or even guidelines that are coming from science how to do this, and they are not too keen on developing this on their own. Because if you have something that is coming bottom up, you have a higher chance of buy-in from the ones who are affected by that in the end, compared to you just put it from the very top by a decree, and then, well, it happens whether you want it or you don't.
Not to push the agenda too hard, but are we, if we're going to be doing some of the work in this area, I mean, the interested people are in the room. So what is actually achievable? Is another scan of policy worth doing? You know, it seems that a multinational fragmented, the RDA practice being so international, I have to think that there's something more valuable than doing a national scan and doing a comparison of national scans, unless we're zooming in on something that's very useful to contribute to in the area of disposal. I'm trying to sharpen what we might want to do as a working group.
Yeah, I would agree, and probably go further in saying that, because I think, at least certainly from the policies within New Zealand and that I've looked at, there's not a practice around them. So on a policy level, it says that, you know, there's responsible disposal. In practice, there is none. So I'm not sure what we're going to gain on looking purely at policies internationally, because I don't think it relates to practice. So unless we get that practice part in there, I'm not sure we're truly going to learn a huge amount about, you know, reality, as opposed to sort of, you know, almost this dream state of our policy landscape.
Perhaps we could hunt down an organization or a person that actually does this and admits it. You know, because I've struggled to find that if people are doing it, they're disinclined to admit it. And for you know, well, you could posit a number of different reasons for that. So yeah, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could say, okay, here's some practice. Let's have a look at practice. Let's analyze the practice and then inform policy, and be a little bit more, you know, ground up.
It does interest me, Max, to go down the line of worked examples. You know, we know UQ and a couple of other groups have done it at a reasonable scale. They've deleted petabytes of duplicate data at least, but that was, you know, even just saying duplicate data got deleted here following this clean path. These checklists were followed. This is a good example of a deletion checklist. That's a contribution that's worth putting up and then going, this is some RDA ticks that we as a working group have gone, okay, you should at least check these things before you hit the delete button. That's a contribution that I'm happy to put some time into. And go bottom up.
The last time I looked at it, the astronomers, the international astronomy community, had a really good model where as soon as something was captured, it was divided into two, well, it was duplicated into two sections. One was released and one was never to be seen by humans again unless there was some sort of catastrophe. It was a way of preserving observational data and sending out to the community for people to do what they want, safe in the knowledge that if it disappeared from their services, that it could be recreatable. But that was an operational model that required international agreements. I think the Antarctic Division has a very good model as well, although it's ratified by a treaty, multinational treaty, which is probably a bit over the top for some of the things that we're interested in, but a model nonetheless. But I don't know how they deal with deletion. Maybe we could investigate. Who fancies a trip to Tasmania?
I was hoping you were going to say Antarctica then.
Yeah, boat trip. Let's get us all on a boat.
I think New Zealand's research vessel is sitting in a harbour somewhere.
Lisanne and Amanda, from your recent thinking about personas, if there was some of this activity from the ground up, and we thought of the model in terms of which actors, which personas are active through that process, is it interesting to you to go worked examples of deletion practices?
Did you want to go ahead? I definitely got an answer. Did you want to? No. Yes, definitely. So disposition logs, and in terms of, are we talking about, so when we do hit delete, or when we're getting ready to hit delete, certain researcher groups require these activities to have been checked off before you hit delete, because they may vary from domain to domain, I guess. So for example, health data, before you delete it, there may be certain things that you have to do to that health data, whereby with observational data or environmental data, maybe we should never hit the delete button, because as time progresses, the value of those data continue to increase. So yeah, I mean, definitely a checklist before you hit delete for certain researcher domains would, or at least the identification that perhaps there's certain activities that are relevant to all researcher domains. That could also be, and what are those basic ones? And then start to look at the different researcher domains and really determine a little bit more what their legal and regulatory compliance frameworks would look like in terms of disposal. So for personas, again, yes, trying to determine which researcher groups have certain elements attached to them would be beneficial for us. So, yeah.
I mean, from the, I guess when we were doing retention in our repository, we do actually have a checklist that we follow to ascertain whether we want to keep things long-term. But one of the issues we have is that we're a generalist repository, and we don't have everybody in every domain to make those judgment calls. So it's me being like, I think we should keep this. Like, there aren't any larger guidelines around that, and that's where the persona work, I think, would definitely help.
So I should add to just a little bit on this. So when we're looking at disposal too, so remember we're building the DRI for researchers in Canada, and taking on some legacy content as well. So we have 5 large host sites throughout Canada that all come equipped with home scratch, nearline, and project space. And right now there are no retention or disposition schedules for any of them. So if you use Scratch and it stays there, then it's there. So we can't optimize the systems. There's no way of going in to see what the data are. And so we're thinking, well, wait, if we kind of know a little bit more about certain data and the disposition of those data, that might help us move legacy and orphan data, because we have lots of orphan data, to a more shared repository. So we're thinking in terms of, well, if the data are orphan, they haven't been touched in 10 years, but we know they're high value, or through this personas work, we know that they belong to, I don't know, an environmental group, or they support environmental studies, and perhaps we might want to make that available in a shared repository, S3, something like that, and so move the stuff out of nearline and out of project and into something where it could be shared and reused, because those investments have been made in those data sets anyway. So yeah, that's another part of the component, is to optimize the systems, but do it in a way that the data become more fair, no matter what stage of life cycle they're at. Sounds utopian, I know.
I was imagining
ambitious.
I was imagining when you said that the data were orphaned and 10 years old, that you were going to hit the delete button, but no, you're making it even more fair and available. But yeah, okay, good.
Can I ask a question then of that? Are you confident that, given your intent, that you're confident that you'd be able to execute that intent? You know what the content is and what state it's at, and you have sufficient information, or are you making actions based on assumptions that you extract from what you do know? It's not what you're talking about to me, as you said, sounds like a really great system. To what extent are you confident that it is implementable? I think is my question.
Max, was that for me or
Yeah,
was that
yeah, or Amanda, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so sorry. My first name is Lisanne, and it only comes up as L, right?
Lisanne, sorry, Lisanne. Sorry.
Lisanne, yeah. Yeah. No, we don't have the information, and that's exactly why we're hoping to get a bit of a. So we didn't get to do the presentations, but one of the ways that we are hoping to gather enough information, and we have that pilot in flight now, with the HPC provisioning. So we have a set of RDM questions, but we want to know if we're asking the right questions, that we can glean enough information about the data without looking at them. So that's really a double blind thing. So yes, we're looking to see if we're asking the right questions. So so that we can make at least a somewhat informed decision. Yeah. So, but I think the data stewards are obviously going to be a key component here. So the role of a data steward within the university is going to be immensely, you can't do it without it. And the role, not necessarily the person, but the role within that, because it's 20 years. It could be 20 years that the data have been sitting around Nearline or project space, and it might still be valuable, right? So to check in with the data steward and kind of network within the university to find out more is key.
Maybe, I mean, because it sounds like, it sounds very, very similar to discussions I've had with some of the stakeholders in projects that I've run at ARDC.
Okay.
I asked the question, do you have sufficient information to make a decision on what to do with these data? And the answer would always come back as not complete. So perhaps there's something that's I'm going to say relatively straightforward, but I don't think it is very straightforward at all. But
No.
Would be a list of bits of information that would be required, ideally that could be codified into some sort of executable command that would inform whoever is the custodian or the assigned person at a particular institution how to attend to those particular pieces of research artifacts, data primarily.
We actually are implementing that in our repository because we actually have a lot of orphaned data in the repository. People start their submissions and don't follow up. So at the year mark, they get 2 emails. The submitter gets 2 emails. Now, whether that's still the same person that's responsible for that data, we don't know. So that's another challenge. But they get an email saying you haven't published your data. Do you still want to continue with this process? And then at the 3-month mark and a 6-3, so it's 3 emails, 6-3 and 1 month mark. And after that, we've done our due diligence. We're going to hit delete.
Right.
So we'll see what that works like in practice. One of the good things about our policies in FERDA when we wrote them is that it's kind of like your data may be retained longer than 10 years, but it has to go through a process. But we don't explicitly tell people what that process is, which I think is a bit of a problem, like in terms of transparency. So we're working on providing more information around that, but also around, I get with my archivist hat on, like what does preservation and long-term retention look like? Because not all data has like a friendly file format that we can normalize to. So does it mean emulation? Can we do that? So long-term retention does not necessarily mean reuse is a possibility.
Sure. Yeah. it's a really frustrating space right at the moment because there's no real common vernacular. You know, we talk about things with implied understanding that it means the same, and it doesn't to different people, and that's you know that's frustrating, but it's indicative of the space. One of the jobs that I had before was at an institution with a large-scale storage facility, and we instead leaned into the myth and we said, we're going to give you more storage than you've ever needed before, you know, and we're going to give it to you for free, but we're only going to give it to you for 4 years. So during this time, and this was at the provisioning stage, and it was initial, but it was manual, but it was at least getting it into their head and starting to get a position where you could manage expectations and say, you're only going to get it for 4 years. At the end of that time, it'd be really great if you could decide what's important, what's not. And then we can transfer it to a longer term storage facility. But we can talk about that later at the time. But at least it gets it into their head that they don't have this forever. They can't come back after they've moved university 6 times and said, have you still got that paper that I left here, you know, in my career here? But it also intimated the idea that there was this handover. There was this handover phase. And yes, it was imperfect. Yes, it sometimes caused more problems than it solved, but at least it got it into people's heads. And I think having something that's a little bit more mature than that could be quite useful at an institution. Anyway, that was just an example.
Max,
I'm going to go back in September and see how they're doing.
Well, I was going to ask a question. When you had these discussions with the researchers, did you provide them with any like educational or material that like explain what important was?
No, we didn't, because it was brand new for the institution and the researchers as a whole. But actually what it did do, which set us out from the rest of the people in the organization, was that we went and talked to researchers. We didn't wait for them to come and talk to us. And, you know, some of them understood it straight away. Some of them said, well, actually, no, but it's growing and I don't know what to do with it. And you could talk them through a couple of options that they might have. And they were really receptive to it, really, really receptive. I know in humanities space at the time, there was a big imaging crisis because there was lots of optical OCR, optical character recognition work going on. And their storage capability was just filling up with image data. And the HAS spaces are generally underfunded for this sort of activity and probably not as technically advanced as, say, our astrophysicists, for example. And so going and talking to them and saying, okay, well, you can do this and you can do this, it was really, really well received. And they understood it and they got it very quickly. I'd like to come back to the idea that FAIR, to me anyway, is really an umbrella for what I would have called good practice, you know, and I don't like to get hung up on the intricacies of FAIR, but to me it seems to be we expect researchers to have integrity in the way that they communicate. We should probably also expect them to have integrity in the way that they manage their evidence, because that's what the data are. They're evidence of their communications. So you know, helping them do that has always been a priority of mine wherever I've worked. But it sounds like you're doing some great stuff there, so well done.
Well, it's baby steps. And the reason I asked you about like the educational piece was because we do actually at Deposit have a question for researchers: do you want your data preserved? And my colleague now is doing some analytics on the answers of those questions. And I was like, do people know what that means?
No.
And so one of the things we also want to do this year is create some like basic primers. Like, what does this entail?
Sure.
What can we promise you? What do we need from you in order to make this happen?
Yeah. I guess if you were to ask my advice, I would say make it as simple as possible. No, if you ask someone whether they want, if you ask a researcher who's a busy person, normally, if they want their stuff preserved, of course they're going to say yes, because
yes. Yeah,
it implies an importance that it may not be real or perceived, or it and of course they're not in a position to say what to keep and what to throw away, so they'll just say keep everything because you can do that. Otherwise, I'll go down to my local hardware store and buy a disposable hard drive and stick it on there. So there.
Surprisingly, we get a lot of no's and are unsures.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. That was one of our prime directives, was to encourage people to not do that. And it was a really tough call because enterprise grade hardware is more expensive than retail grade hardware.
And especially things with the databases on top, or the application on top, or the discipline tools on top of that. Aaron, what kind of system is yours? Is it it's a repository at sort of what scale? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, we have about 500 terabytes, something like that, of spread over several hundred different data sets. And it's not only a repository, it's also a computing facility. So people, there's a sort of domain specific programming language. People can submit a job to do some computation on the server and then download the results, which are typically much smaller than the input data. So it's hot storage. It's used for computation. It's not, cold archival storage. And we don't have any other storage medium at the moment. One of the things we're thinking about is what to use as cold storage if we do settle on a policy for offloading things that aren't being used very much, so that they're no longer so expensive to maintain, but they are still available if someone wants to get them back.
What's the process for that repository growing at the moment?
When somebody asks for a data set, if it's not too big and it's not too difficult to ingest, then we just do it. And if it's a bigger job, then we ask them to write it into their project budget and fund part of the time of one of the members of our team.
So it's growing relatively slowly, but it's growing always.
Yeah, there's one data set in particular that is funded that's growing at a pretty good rate. Like probably the data set is already probably 10-15% of the total, and it's growing much faster than any of the other data sets.
Yeah, Vitold and I were talking about those types of hot-ish repositories where you need the compute to be there to make those data kind of permanently useful. Not just the query engine, presentation part of it's one part often, but actually doing something with the data. So the GIS systems especially, or other systems where you might be doing some work on those data. Yeah, that gets expensive to run long term. And so you really need the facilities and the organizations behind it. We're talking to Hartree Computer Centre in the UK today. They've got beamline data going back years and years and years that they've never had a look at, really. Their stats for those going back and looking at those data is very poor, but they're totally kept there. They're never going to delete them at the moment because they got some Nobel Prizes out of those 1960s data, and they're not going to delete those 1960s data. So they're there permanently, but they're starting to struggle with the size of growth of the system as a whole, and trying to work out, what's the economic failure at a national British level to go, okay, we can't keep those anymore. So they were having some fun conversations today going, well, we could just, lose the tapes, lose the storage, and if we rebuilt it, we'd start without it. But yeah, nobody's going back to those old data, but they are being well kept at the moment.
You could send them to the British Library, tell them.
Well, it's. I approached a few people in Australia saying for the university sector, what if we just accept it and send it all to National Library of Australia? And there were a lot of upset librarians. The community of chief librarians was not very impressed with me. Yeah.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah. I'm wondering what's useful for our remaining time. Aaron, you've caught us kind of working on the problem of deciding what to do with the working group. I'll throw it open to the room. What would you like to do for the next 20 minutes, half an hour?
Okay, this is probably a fairly naive question. Apologies. What do we actually have to do in terms of if we want to form the working group? We have to put in a sort of a proposal type document, or?
Yep, it's at the end of our working document. There's all the sections of the submission for the working group.
Right. So the case statement.
Case statement.
Case statement. Okay.
If you come along to our working our session this evening, Claire, we'll be discussing our case statement for the proposal for the working group that we've got. So we're happy to share that with you if you want to see what that looks like. But that's my understanding too. You submit a case statement and it goes for review.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I'm aiming to come along tonight.
Get those kids fed early, to bed early.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Always
the working group also gets a little bit of support from Secretariat, whereas an interest group gets less or no support.
I also think that the focus of the working group to have a real tangible deliverable at the end is something that will help to flesh out where this BoF and the people around this really want to go, because this depends a lot on the composition, how this group will be set up. And having a tangible result definitely creates something, and well, it stops too much discussion about where one wants to go or not. So especially in this situation, it might be very helpful if we try to achieve this status and the constraints and chances that are combined with that.
And it's got to be valuable to multiple different groups, so multinational in its sort of impact.
Yeah, so I think this was already part of the discussion today. And I've also heard this sentiment before in Salzburg when I talk to people. While it's tempting to do the traditional approach of, well, going out there in the field and collecting whatever there is on data and filing everything, it might be really valuable if we focus on hard and existing examples of whatever degree of perfection or matureness in this field, but that we really keep this as concise as possible, because nobody will benefit if we have a very much complete collection of no policies or of this high level policies where everybody's talking about something, but nobody is really telling hard decisions. So this will be a very valuable result of the working group, even if it's the only result that we'll have. As you said before, I think it was Claire, that there might be such policies already out there. We just don't know this. And we, well, could have the chance to drag them a bit into the limelight, whether they want it or not.
if we're thinking about what the BoF's sessions have shown us, is that there is a demand for thinking about this space, that people are working actively in it, and that there are different kinds of problems that we identified. We didn't really get to push because of time management last session on the sharpness, using that group think of where their pain actually was, but it seemed to be in the typing that they did to relate to the policy. That was a triggering aspect, but we kind of also set it up for them by that being in the document and being an easy thing to type yes into. We didn't get a chance to poke it around, and in this conversation we've had a bit of a chance to tear away a little bit of that. What do we mean by policy? Where would be the value? And then we also said there's maybe a bottom-up case study examples of has anybody done it, and what would be a checklist. So those two things have, I think, come out of our discussions and are valid things that we've covered. The rest is us having to read the room a little bit and seeing what's the art of the possible in terms of what could be an achievable deliverable. Is that a fair summary of? Go on, Claire.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think hopefully this supports it. And I think this was one of the polls from the last session in the room, and to me this sort of points to kind of the shared policy, or the shared problem rather, and not necessarily an effective way of dealing with it. So I sort of quite like the way this is shaped in terms of, and good work on your questions, Luke, but kind of essentially we all have quite a lot of data. We mostly have policies. Some of them are more or less up to date. There might be a process, sort of, sometimes, but there's not really an effective way of doing it in most cases. So to me, I guess again, it kind of talks to, we should be focusing on sort of the area of least maturity, right? Not maybe the policy so much, but actually effective tools for doing it. And maybe, as was previously said, if we find some people doing this, right? If we can find people who have pressed delete, is that sort of a good starting point for how we come together on those kind of tools.
Yeah, thanks for taking us back to that Menti. I forgot how clear the room was on that slide.
I think one important bit of information that's also in the slide is the need for processes, because processes is something that attaches policies to tools and to practice, because this is something that's a bit more abstract than the tools. In my understanding, tools is really having checklists, as perhaps having a framework of, I don't know, we're using Fuji to validate whether data is fair enough for a specific set of requirements, and if not, it gets demoted into the throw it earlier way pile. But the processes, this is really something that spans different tools and also different policies, because it just says, okay, we have a block that has this function, and if this function is positive, it has this result, and otherwise it has that result. So this has a higher chance of being transferable, as we are looking at a very international community and also a very heterogeneous community. Like I mentioned in my slides last time, even though it's all Germany, it's a completely heterogeneous landscape, and whatever you have from one actor is pretty much I wouldn't say unusable for the other, but they tend to say, no, it's completely different with our data and our centers and whatever. But processes is something that they can translate.
And Claire's point in the chat that it's can be tool agnostic. Tools, in my way of thinking, was also automations that you might have implemented inside your systems, and the process might be these automations or triggers as well, but we're not quite at that stage of having everything fully automated, and so we do need to think through the processes. For us, one of the more valuable processes has just been our certifications or our audits of ourselves, to go, where are we and who's allowed to do what and what are the practices. So just these reviews of ourselves have been incredibly useful to go, oh, there's huge gaps in our process thinking. We couldn't even trigger a deletion action if we actually wanted to at the moment, because we're just not sure what we might do by mistake. So there's a fair bit of pre-work before we can do some of those activities that we're thinking we'd like to do regularly. Yeah, in purging those data, I can't know for sure that my systems are saying, yeah, that's really cold, it's really orphaned, it really hasn't been touched in 20 years. Those, are you really sure about those things? That, yeah, that has to be trued up for us.
I think adding to that, look, it sounds a bit, we had similar situation at the National Research Council, which was more of a government institution, but they came to us looking to seek the process for disposition delete of very old legacy data. But the showstopper on this one wasn't all of the normal, it was a data sharing agreement. So they had actually loaned out the lab and their researchers, some of the researchers, and the invited researchers would come in and they collaborate together, but they had a data sharing agreement at the beginning of the project that stated that the NRC would be the custodians of the data for X amount of time. And we didn't know what that X amount of time was. And ironically, the agreement, which is usually 7 years, but it's actually 7 years from the time it's closed. But like in finance, agreements and contracts, you only keep them for 7 fiscal years. So I think somebody actually took it to heart and went and deleted it after 7 years. So the data sharing agreement was nowhere to be found. So we didn't know what our responsibility was and what we had committed to doing. So it was kind of like going back to the vendor to see, et cetera, track down who might still be around. But so part of the process for some maybe is there a data sharing agreement that helps at least determine what the life cycle of the data are. So it can get complex there. Death by metadata. Anyway,
Well,
I wanted to share that. Yeah.
The risk appetite of the organization really then is to go, okay, we've got a thing in place, and until you can tell me that, we're not going to be growled at for, yeah, it's a risk appetite
Totally
thing. Yeah,
you got it.
Yeah.
So that could be something fun that we could, think about as a see, I'm just thinking this is super valuable for me, the risk appetite statement. I completely forgot about that, but that would be something that could be part of the process, right? But anyways.
Yeah, so if I'm replaying then our conversations, and again, just trying to confirm or sharpen what we're saying, there's a little bit still in, and I'm replaying Witold especially here, so confirm if I'm saying the right thing. But you still think that there's some value in finding some nuggets in the policy language to see if there's permissions, especially around deletions, and looking for some maybe terminology or valuable language in the policy landscape. And then there's this conversation that we're having now about the process tools part of it, where there's certainly some contributions that we could make. So I think they're the two parts of the they're not, it's not exclusive, they're not, you know, we don't have to, we can do both, to say it in a positive way, but there's that's the two parts of the conversation at the moment that have emerged from the BoF.
I would say that those are the most concrete ones, because a major part of the BoF, if I just go through what we discussed a bit today and also in the first session, was the general consensus of having a need but moving around in very unclear circumstances. And I think we should focus more on providing those, as you said, nuggets of clarity that are there, even with the caveat, it's just fragments. It's not a whole workflow. It's something that somebody else has thought about, but they haven't perhaps tested it yet. But or like Amanda said, but there's an idea, and this is a concrete idea, and this is already more than a lot of others have. And I think this would help, because if I see such a checklist, for example, like what Amanda has, it's much easier for me to say, oh yes, this is cool, or say, no, it's absolutely horrible, I disagree with that. But it's I can transfer this to my situation. And with the policy
having something concrete
part, it's too abstract.
Okay. So validating that around the room, if there's some value in process and checklists, or, you know, tools that we could use to say, these would be the natural things that you would do to check before deletion, and would have to be informed by some policy framework, which would have to be then informed by legislation and national government and other things top down, and your institutionals, governance frameworks and all those things. Given those things exist for your institution or agency, you're operating within a context, and you have to understand those contexts, and there's some work to be done to maybe, to Max's earlier point, clarify the language and start to systematize that. But we can say that's probably not our work. Our work probably is down at this process and tools level. If we do see some nuggets of these are good words for you to be using systematically, that we can then implement through our implementation plans down. But our focus is probably in this process tools layer.
I'm trying to this in the notes document, though. Please jump in if I'm not doing a good job. Under the development goals for what we actually want to do. I think I'm in the right point.
Yeah, thank you very much for keeping track of that.
Thanks, Claire.
So looking a bit at the time and the rapidly declining concentration on my end, perhaps suggesting a bit where we could go with that. So perhaps we could coordinate an internal meeting of the working group so far, to formulate an email with more or less the condensed content of the notes, and send this out to the people who were brave enough to include their contact details in the BoF, and to say, okay, we are using this and the discussions around that to formulate this the work plan, the case statement, the RDA tools, and invite them to join us for this working session, to write this case statement and perhaps line out the working plan. And then, well, perhaps we could even suggest already a date for a meeting, so that it's a really concise mail with everything, call to action.
Yeah, I like the idea of capturing some of the people who are involved in the BoF and adding them into that working. What was it called? But at least into the website tool where we've got our content, and getting them to subscribe to that, so that we could then just do mail outs to everybody. Max, any lessons learned from writing your case statement in co-writing it so far?
I had to revisit the style that the RDA expects from 10 years ago when I last engaged with the RDA. So there are plenty of examples out there. I think they may actually assign you a member of the Tiger team to coordinate, which is really helpful, really, really very helpful. Well, much like most other things that I've been involved in, Luke, I've always thought that less is more. And getting the language concise is always a struggle, especially if you've got more than a number of different editors. But that's about the extent. It's familiarize yourself with some of the other case statements. There's a language that they expect, and it just helps them to accept it if you're writing in their language. That's all.
So I completely agree with Vitald's summary and approach so far. I think that's a really good process for us to simplify it, get it down to something that the people can read in an email and then join us in a meeting. So a couple of weeks away. We keep the momentum going. Reach out to Jitka and see if we can get into a meeting together.
Do you have anyone else?
Got a few.
Do you have anyone else from ARDC on this interest group?
Yeah, we asked a couple of people. Robin Heron was going to get me somebody, but I don't think it came through in the end.
I'll happily join if you'll accept me.
We happily accept if you want to join.
I think I might have to ask permission, but I'll just say that I give myself permission.
Yeah.
I guess we had Andrew and Keith in the other session as well, right?
Sure. Well, Keith's always been kind of interested on the side because he's got that infrastructure. I'm actually catching up with James day after tomorrow, but just on the day that I leave London from infrastructure RDA side of things.
Is that James Wilson?
Mm-hmm.
He filled my vacant spot when I left UCL.
Yeah. It's my last to do before I head back down under.
Small world.
So yeah, that sounds really good. I'm keen to explore this idea of process and tools for data deletion. Gives us something to hold on to and some worked examples, and then we can see if there's any policy nuggets that we agree supports that. But I don't think that that's our primary job, is to solve national policies or to do a major survey of national policies. I think that's just a thankless, useless task that everybody will see. That it's an easy thing to ask for because you often want that synthesis to be done for you. But the crosswork of many different policies just gets to be a big shotgun and scramble. So we know that even having done it nationally, it was a pain in the butt and not very useful for the group that then had to read through it. All right. So any suggestions as to when, or do we just do that via email?
I'd suggest to do this via email to have Jitka again
Jitka.
on board.
Mhm.
And
Cool. We can play around with the time slot to be a little bit more friendly, but see if, especially now we've got Canada in the room. Sounds good. Well, Aaron, now you kind of know what we're doing. You're more than welcome to join us if you throw your email into the working doc. Yeah, you're now part of the conversation.
Right, should we leave it there?
Well, it was a pleasure running this particular style of BoF with all of you. We had the two styles. We had the dynamic one where we lost track of time, and then we had this one where we're ending a little bit early, but with I think quite a good summary of the two meetings. So thanks everybody for your brains, tired brains and awake brains, and Max, and I hope you have a really good session for yours. I'll catch you all around at some point soon. See you all online.
Hi.
You.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you.
see you. Bye bye.